The autumn breeze carried the faint scent of patchouli and guitar strings through the Richmond Folk Festival. I adjusted my leather satchel, filled with delicate collecting tools, as I wandered between the stages. My name's Hazel Griffin, and I preserve the beauty of insects for a living. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Sarah Mitchell to the Riverside stage. The announcement barely registered as I searched for inspiration among the festival crowds. My upcoming exhibition needed something special, something that could capture both the scientific precision and artistic soul of my work. The first haunting notes of an acoustic guitar stopped me in my tracks. The melody floated through the air like a rare butterfly, drawing me closer to the stage. As I made my way through the crowd, my green eyes fixed on the performer, I noticed another woman seemed equally entranced. She stood about 20 feet away, her blonde hair catching the late afternoon sun. Her slender fingers moved unconsciously, as if sketching the music in the air. Something about her made my breath catch. Maybe it was the intensity in her gray eyes, or the way she swayed slightly to the rhythm. The song spoke of transformation and rebirth, themes that resonated deeply with my work. I found myself moving closer to the mysterious blonde, drawn by some inexplicable force. She held a leather-bound sketchbook, its pages ruffling in the breeze. Our eyes met during the chorus, and she smiled, a warm, genuine expression that made my heart flutter like the wings of the specimens I work with. The performer's voice soared over the crowd, but I barely heard it. Time seemed to slow as we shared that moment of connection. When the song ended, the spell didn't break. She took a step toward me, and I noticed the pencil smudges on her fingers. Another artist, perhaps? The festival crowd swirled around us, but we remained in our own little bubble. The way she captured metamorphosis in lyrics, she said, her voice soft and melodious. It reminded me of your work. I blinked in surprise. You know my work? I saw your butterfly exhibition at the Natural History Museum last spring. I'm Natasha Harris. I do nature illustrations. She extended her hand, and when our fingers touched, I felt that same flutter in my chest. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, much like the wings of my prized monarch specimens. As we stood there, discussing art and nature and music, I couldn't shake the feeling that something extraordinary was beginning. Would you like to get coffee? The words tumbled out before I could stop them. There's this great little place just around the corner. Natasha's smile widened, and she tucked a strand of blonde hair behind her ear. I'd love that. Maybe you can tell me more about how you preserve such delicate creatures. As we walked away from the festival, the music fading behind us, I realized that sometimes the most beautiful specimens aren't the ones we can pin under glass. Sometimes they're the moments that preserve themselves in our hearts, like this one, perfect and precious and completely unexpected. A week after the folk festival, I found myself at Belle Isle, my favorite spot for collecting specimens. The morning mist still clung to the rocks, creating an ethereal atmosphere perfect for finding interesting insects. I'd been thinking about Natasha every day since our coffee date, where we'd talked for hours about art and nature. I was carefully examining a fallen log when I heard the soft scratch of pencil on paper. Looking up, I nearly dropped my collection jar. There she was, perched on a boulder, sketchbook in hand. Natasha's blonde hair was pulled back in a loose bun, a few strands escaping to dance in the breeze. Are you following me? I called out, trying to sound teasing rather than hopeful. She looked up, those gray eyes widening in surprise before crinkling with amusement. I could ask you the same thing, she replied, closing her sketchbook. I come here every Tuesday to draw. The light is perfect for capturing detail. I made my way over, careful not to disturb any potential specimens. Her sketchbook lay open to a stunning rendering of a swallowtail butterfly. The detail was extraordinary. Each scale on the wings seemed to shimmer on the paper. This is incredible, I breathed, leaning closer. You've captured the iridescence perfectly. Would you like to get coffee again? She asked suddenly. I know a quiet place nearby with an amazing view of the river. The cafe turned out to be a tiny spot tucked away in an old tobacco warehouse. We claimed a corner table by the window, where the autumn sunlight streamed in, making Natasha's hair glow like spun gold. I've been thinking about your preservation techniques, she said, warming her hands around her mug. Have you ever considered collaborating with an illustrator? Before I could respond, thunder rumbled overhead. We both looked out to see dark clouds rolling in fast across the river. My studio's just 2 blocks away, I offered, watching the first heavy drops hit the window. We could wait out the storm there. We made a dash for it, but the rain caught us anyway. By the time we reached my studio, we were both laughing and dripping wet. I fumbled with the keys, very aware of how close Natasha was standing. My studio was my sanctuary, filled with carefully preserved specimens in glass cases and works in progress. Natasha moved through the space with reverence, studying each display with genuine interest. "It's like a museum of tiny treasures," she whispered, fogging the glass of a case containing iridescent beetles. Her fingers traced the air above them, as if connecting invisible dots. I found myself watching her more than explaining my work. The way she moved, the thoughtful tilt of her head, the slight furrow of concentration between her brows. She was as fascinating as any specimen I'd ever studied. The storm raged outside, but inside my studio, time seemed to slow down. We talked about our artistic processes, our inspirations, our failures and successes. Natasha shared her struggles with capturing the ethereal quality of butterfly wings, and I found myself offering to teach her about wing structure and patterns. As the afternoon wore on, our conversation drifted to more personal territory. She told me about growing up in Virginia, about her first illustration job, about her dreams of publishing a book of nature artwork. I shared stories about my most challenging preservations and the thrill of discovering rare specimens. When the storm finally passed, leaving behind a fresh, clean scent and golden evening light, neither of us seemed eager to end our impromptu meeting. Standing in the doorway, Natasha turned to me with a slight smile. "Same time next Tuesday?" she asked, and my heart did that familiar flutter. "I'll bring my collecting gear," I replied. "Maybe we can find something special for you to draw." As I watched her walk away, I realized my studio felt different somehow, warmer, more alive, like a cocoon waiting for something beautiful to emerge. The commission request came on a crisp October morning. Natasha called, her voice filled with barely contained excitement. "Hazel, I need your expertise. I've got a contract for a series of scientific illustrations, and I want your specimens as references." That's how we began spending our evenings together in my studio. I'd carefully position the specimens under specialized lighting, while Natasha would set up her easel, her gray eyes intense with concentration. The soft scratch of her pencil became a familiar soundtrack to my nights. "Tell me about your last relationship," she said one evening, not looking up from her sketch of a Luna moth. The question caught me off guard, making me nearly drop the delicate specimen I was handling. 3 years ago, I replied, steadying my hands. She was a marine biologist. We were together for 2 years before she took a position in California. I watched Natasha's reaction carefully, but she just nodded, adding subtle shading to the moth's wings. "Mine ended last winter," she offered. She couldn't understand why I'd rather spend my weekends sketching in the woods than at gallery openings. Her pencil paused. "It's hard to find someone who gets it, you know? The dedication to our craft." I moved closer, examining her progress. "The way it consumes us?" "Exactly." She looked up then, and I realized how close we were standing. I could see flecks of silver in her gray eyes, like scattered starlight. Our late-night sessions became more intimate, not in a physical way, but in the sharing of stories and secrets. We talked about our families, her conservative upbringing in Virginia, my liberal parents in Vermont. We discussed our fears, our ambitions, our disappointments. One night, while examining a particularly rare moth specimen I'd preserved, something shifted in the air between us. Natasha was leaning close, her blonde hair falling forward as she studied the intricate pattern of scales. "It's remarkable," she whispered, "the way you preserve their beauty forever." "Some things are worth preserving," I replied, my voice equally soft. Our eyes met over the display case, and the air seemed to crackle with unspoken possibilities. I'm not sure who moved first, maybe we both did. But suddenly her lips were on mine, soft and warm and tasting faintly of the mint tea she'd been drinking. The kiss was gentle, exploratory, like the first tentative sketch on a blank canvas. When we pulled apart, Natasha's cheeks were flushed, and I could feel my heart racing. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the gentle hum of the climate control system keeping my specimens preserved. "I've wanted to do that since the folk festival," she admitted, her fingers ghosting over my cheek. "Why didn't you?" I caught her hand in mine, marveling at how natural it felt. "I was afraid of ruining this," She gestured to our workspace, the half-finished illustrations, the carefully preserved specimens. Our collaboration means so much to me. Maybe we can preserve this too, I suggested, squeezing her hand. Add it to our collection of beautiful things. She answered with another kiss, this one more confident than the first. Outside, the Richmond night hummed with urban life, but in my studio, time seemed to stand still. Like one of my specimens caught in amber, this moment felt perfectly preserved, a beginning captured in the midst of transformation. As we finally parted for the night, I watched Natasha gather her art supplies, her movements unhurried and deliberate. The air between us had changed, charged with possibility and promise. Like the metamorphosis of the creatures I preserved, something new and beautiful was emerging. Same time tomorrow? She asked at the door, her smile holding a new warmth. Wouldn't miss it, I replied, already counting the hours until I'd see her again. That night, as I carefully mounted a new butterfly specimen, I couldn't help but smile. Some specimens required patience, precision, and perfect timing. As it turned out, so did love. The smoke alarm's piercing shriek jolted me awake at am. For a moment I thought I was dreaming, until the acrid smell hit my nostrils. My first thought wasn't of my own safety, but of my specimens. Years of careful preservation, irreplaceable rare insects, all at risk. I grabbed my phone and emergency bag, years of drill practice kicking in. The hallway was already filling with smoke, and I could hear the panic of other residents. Then I remembered, Natasha lived just 2 floors above me. My heart stopped. Everyone out! Fire on the 3rd floor! The building manager's voice echoed through the stairwell. I started climbing instead of descending, ignoring the shouts behind me. The smoke grew thicker with each step. I found her door and pounded on it. Natasha, wake up! The handle was warm but not hot. I tried it, locked. Just as I was about to shout again, I heard movement inside. Hazel? Her voice was thick with sleep and fear. The door opened, revealing her disheveled form. She had her sketchbook clutched to her chest. We need to go, now. I grabbed her free hand. Is there anything else you need to save? My portfolios, my life's work. Her eyes were wide with panic. In the studio room. The smoke was getting thicker. Against every safety protocol I knew, we rushed into her apartment. The studio was a mess of papers and canvases. Together we grabbed what we could, her essential portfolios, her current commission work, her favorite brushes. The heat was intensifying as we made our way down the emergency stairs. I could hear the fire trucks arriving, their sirens piercing the night. Natasha stumbled on the last flight, and I caught her, holding her close as we finally burst out into the cool night air. We joined the crowd of displaced residents on the street, watching as firefighters battled the blaze. Natasha was trembling against me, clutching her rescued artwork. I kept my arm around her, trying to provide what comfort I could. My specimens, I whispered, watching flames lick at windows near my floor. Years of work, possibly gone. Natasha squeezed my hand. We'll save what we can, she promised. Together. The fire chief later told us it started from faulty wiring on the 3rd floor. The building wasn't destroyed, but there was significant water and smoke damage. We weren't allowed back in until it was deemed safe, which could take days. Stay with me at the Jefferson, Natasha said suddenly. At my questioning look, she added, I have points from all my business trips. We can get a suite. The hotel was only a few blocks away, and they had vacancy despite the late hour. The suite was elegant, with 2 queen beds and a small sitting area, but after the adrenaline wore off, exhaustion hit hard. I can't believe you came up to get me, Natasha said softly as we sat on one of the beds, still smelling of smoke and fear. I couldn't leave you there. I touched her cheek, still sooty from our escape. I couldn't bear the thought of losing you. She leaned into my touch, her gray eyes shimmering with unshed tears. I was so scared, but then you were there, like some kind of guardian angel. A very smoky angel, I tried to joke, but my voice cracked. The reality of what could have happened was hitting me hard. Stay with me tonight? She asked. I don't want to be alone. We ended up sharing one of the beds, holding each other close. The adrenaline crash left us both shaking slightly, finding comfort in each other's presence. I listened to her breathing even out as she fell asleep, her hand still clasped in mine. As I drifted off, I realized that while I might have lost some precious specimens in the fire, I'd preserved something far more valuable. Sometimes it takes nearly losing everything to understand what matters most. The city lights flickered through the hotel window, casting soft shadows across Natasha's sleeping face. Tomorrow we'd deal with insurance claims and damage assessment. But for now, we were safe, we were together, and somehow that felt like enough. Living with Natasha in the hotel suite revealed a whole new side of her. She was an early riser, greeting each day with quiet determination as she set up her makeshift art station by the window. I'd wake to find her already sketching, the morning light making her blonde hair glow like a halo. "You talk in your sleep," she told me over room service coffee one morning. "Last night you were cataloging butterfly species." Her smile was tender, making my heart skip. We fell into an easy routine. I'd work on salvaging what specimens I could from my apartment during the day, while she continued her illustration work from the hotel. Evenings were spent together, ordering takeout and spreading our work across the suite's antique desk. "Look at this," I said one evening, carefully unwrapping a specimen case I'd retrieved. The glass cracked, but the Luna moth inside is perfectly preserved. The iridescent wings gleamed under the hotel's chandelier. Natasha set down her sketchbook and came closer. "It's beautiful," she whispered, leaning over my shoulder, like it was meant to survive. Her presence behind me was warm and comforting. I'd gotten used to these casual intimacies, the brush of her hand against mine, the way she'd rest her head on my shoulder when she was tired. The insurance company estimated it would take weeks to repair the building. Neither of us complained. There was something magical about this temporary sanctuary we'd created, away from the world's demands. One afternoon, I returned to find Natasha surrounded by my salvaged specimen cases. She'd carefully cleaned each one, removing the smoke residue with gentle precision. "You didn't have to do this," I said, touched by her thoughtfulness. "You saved my artwork," she replied simply. "Let me help save yours." I watched her work, her graceful hands moving with the same care she used when drawing. Something swelled in my chest, an emotion too big to name. That evening, as we sorted through more rescued items, our hands brushed over a particularly delicate butterfly specimen. The touch sparked like electricity between us. When our eyes met, I saw my own feelings reflected in her gray gaze. The kiss was different from our first one in the studio. This was slower, deeper, filled with understanding and gratitude. Her lips tasted of mint tea and possibility. "I think I'm falling for you," she whispered against my mouth. The words sent a shiver down my spine. "I think I already have," I admitted, running my fingers through her soft blonde hair. We spent that night talking about the future, about finding a new apartment together, about combining our artistic spaces, about all the possibilities ahead of us. The damaged specimens and waterlogged sketchbooks seemed less important now. "We could get a place with better natural light," Natasha mused, tracing patterns on my arm. "Maybe something with a dedicated studio space. And proper ventilation for specimen preservation," I added, making her laugh. The next few days passed in a blur of insurance forms, property assessments, and stolen moments together. We'd take breaks from the paperwork to explore Richmond, finding new coffee shops and quiet corners of the city. One evening, as we walked along the James River, Natasha stopped suddenly. "Thank you," she said, squeezing my hand. "For what?" "For making this disaster feel like a beginning instead of an ending." I pulled her close, kissing her under the setting sun. Around us, the river flowed steadily, carrying away the last traces of smoke and fear, leaving only hope in its wake. Back in our suite, surrounded by the organized chaos of our combined lives, I watched Natasha sketch by lamplight. She was drawing us two figures emerging from flames, transformed but unbroken. Like the specimens I preserved, we had survived our trial by fire, becoming something rare and precious in the process. That night, as we fell asleep in each other's arms, I realized that sometimes the most beautiful specimens aren't the ones we seek out, but the ones that find us when we least expect them. And sometimes it takes losing everything to find exactly what you need. The email from the Richmond Gallery of Modern Art arrived on a Tuesday morning. Natasha and I were having breakfast in our new shared apartment when both our phones chimed simultaneously. "They want to feature our collaboration," Natasha breathed, her gray eyes wide with excitement. "A full exhibition combining your preserved specimens with my illustrations." It seemed perfect, too perfect. We spent the next few weeks in a creative frenzy, transforming our living room into a workshop. Natasha's easel stood next to my preservation station, our two worlds merging into one artistic vision. Until the first major disagreement. The specimens need to be the focal point, I insisted, gesturing to a particularly rare butterfly display. They're the foundation of everything. But the illustrations tell their story, Natasha countered, her blonde hair falling forward as she leaned over her latest piece. They bring emotion to the science. The tension built slowly, like storm clouds gathering. We both had strong visions for the exhibition, and they didn't always align. Years of working independently had made us set in our ways. The lighting needs to be precise for the specimens, I argued during a meeting with the gallery curator. Too much exposure could damage them. But my watercolors need natural light to show their true depth, Natasha responded, frustration evident in her voice. We stopped eating dinner together, both working late into the night in separate corners of the apartment. The distance between us grew, measured in unspoken words and avoided glances. One evening, I found Natasha staring at her latest illustration, a stunning depiction of a moth's metamorphosis. Her shoulders were tense, her expression troubled. "Maybe we should cancel the exhibition," she said quietly, not looking at me, "before it ruins everything." The thought of losing both the exhibition and her hit me like a physical blow. I moved closer, really looking at her artwork for the first time in days. The way she'd captured the delicate transition from chrysalis to adult was breathtaking. "Your illustrations," I said slowly, "they don't just show what the specimens look like, they show what they mean." She turned to face me, surprise in her eyes. "And your specimens give my art purpose," she admitted. "They're not just subjects, they're stories preserved in time." The realization hit us both at once. We weren't competing mediums, we were complementary ones. Like the intricate patterns on a butterfly's wings, our work was meant to mirror and enhance each other. "I'm sorry," we both said simultaneously, then laughed, breaking the tension. I crossed the room to her, taking her hands in mine. They were stained with watercolors, beautiful in their dedication to her craft. Without warning, she pulled me closer, her lips meeting mine with an intensity that took my breath away. What followed was our first time together, passionate and tender, there among our artwork and specimens. It was a celebration of reconciliation, of understanding, of two artistic souls finding harmony. Later, tangled in sheets in each other, we redesigned the entire exhibition. We worked as one, combining our strengths instead of fighting over them. The specimens would be displayed in specially designed cases that allowed natural light to filter through, while Natasha's illustrations would surround them, telling the story of their transformation. "We were both being too precious about our work," Natasha mused, tracing patterns on my bare shoulder. "Sometimes the most beautiful things happen when we let go of control," I replied, thinking of how our relationship had evolved. The gallery curator was thrilled with our new vision. "This is what we were hoping for," she said. "A true fusion of art and science." That evening, as we worked side by side on the final pieces, I watched Natasha sketch. Her movements were sure and graceful, adding life to the preserved specimens I'd prepared. We'd found our rhythm, like a perfectly choreographed dance between preservation and interpretation. "We make quite a team," she said, catching me watching her. "We make quite a lot of things," I replied, pulling her in for another kiss. The exhibition was no longer just about displaying specimens or showcasing artwork. It had become a testament to transformation, not just of insects but of two artists learning to create something greater than themselves. The call came while Natasha and I were setting up our exhibition. "My sister's coming to Richmond," she said, her face paling slightly as she lowered her phone. "Margaret wants to see where I'm living now." I knew about Margaret, the conservative older sister who still set place cards for Natasha's ex-boyfriend at family dinners, 5 years after their breakup. The sister who conveniently forgot to invite Natasha's previous girlfriend to their mother's birthday celebration. "When?" I asked, carefully mounting a butterfly specimen. "Tomorrow." Natasha's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her sketches. She was already in DC for business. I couldn't say no. That night, I watched as Natasha moved through our apartment, hiding subtle signs of our relationship. My toothbrush disappeared from the bathroom counter. My clothes migrated from our shared closet to the spare room. Each small erasure felt like a paper cut. Margaret arrived the next afternoon, perfectly coiffed and radiating judgment. "Darling, this neighborhood is rather artistic, isn't it?" She air-kissed Natasha's cheeks. "I'm an artist, Maggie," Natasha replied, using the nickname her sister hated. "This is my roommate, Hazel. We're collaborating on an exhibition." Roommate. The word hung in the air like smoke, choking me. I smiled politely and shook Margaret's manicured hand. Over dinner at a nearby restaurant, Margaret dominated the conversation with stories about her husband's law practice and her children's private school achievements. She barely acknowledged my presence, except to ask pointed questions about my unusual career choice. "Insects?" She wrinkled her nose. "How interesting. And you live together while working on this project?" "The arrangement makes sense financially," Natasha said quickly, not meeting my eyes. "Richmond's rental market is expensive." I excused myself to the bathroom, needing a moment alone. When I returned, I heard Margaret's lowered voice. "Mother's worried about you living this bohemian lifestyle. Thomas still asks about you." "Thomas is married, Maggie." Natasha's voice was tight. "And I'm happy here." "Are you?" Margaret's tone dripped with concern. "Alone in this city, sharing an apartment with a specimen collector?" I stood in the shadows, rain beginning to patter against the restaurant's windows. Through the glass, Richmond's lights blurred like smeared watercolors. Later that night, after Margaret retired to her hotel, the tension finally broke. "I'm sorry," Natasha whispered, reaching for me in our darkened bedroom. "I'm so sorry." I stepped back. "Do you know how it felt, watching you erase us?" "You don't understand my family." "I understand hiding," I interrupted. "I understand shame." The rain outside grew heavier, matching my mood. Natasha moved closer, her gray eyes pleading. "I'm not ashamed of you. I'm ashamed of them, of their narrow minds and smaller hearts." "Then show me," I challenged. "Show them who you are, who we are." She kissed me then, fierce and desperate, backing me against the rain-streaked window. "I love you," she breathed against my lips. "I'm tired of pretending I don't." The next morning, Margaret arrived for breakfast. Natasha met her at the door, straight-backed and determined. "Maggie, we need to talk." I stood in the kitchen, heart pounding, as Natasha told her sister everything. About us, about love, about living truthfully. Margaret sat silent, her coffee growing cold. Finally she spoke. "What will I tell Mother?" "Tell her I'm happy," Natasha said, reaching for my hand. "Tell her I'm loved." The rain had stopped, leaving the morning air clean and fresh. Margaret left shortly after, her goodbye stiff but not entirely cold. As the door closed behind her, Natasha collapsed into my arms. "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen," I whispered into her hair. "I couldn't bear hiding you anymore," she replied. "You're not something to be preserved behind glass. You're something to be celebrated." We spent that evening replacing everything we'd hidden, my toothbrush, my clothes, our photos. Each item restored felt like reclaiming a piece of ourselves. Later, as we lay in bed, Natasha traced the outline of my face in the darkness. "Thank you for making me brave," she murmured. "You were always brave," I replied. "You just needed someone to be brave for." Outside, Richmond hummed with nightlife, but in our apartment, we'd created our own sanctuary. One where nothing needed to be hidden, where love could flourish in the light. The opening night of our exhibition exceeded all expectations. The Richmond Gallery of Modern Art was packed, the crowd a mix of art enthusiasts, scientists, and curious locals. Our work filled the main gallery, my preserved specimens in custom-lit cases, surrounded by Natasha's stunning illustrations that seemed to breathe life into the static displays. I watched from across the room as Natasha charmed a group of collectors, her blonde hair catching the gallery lights. She'd worn a deep green dress that matched my eyes, a detail that made my heart flutter every time I noticed it. "This is extraordinary work," a voice said beside me. I turned to find Dr. Eleanor Matthews, curator of the National Museum of Natural History. "The way you've merged scientific preservation with artistic interpretation, it's revolutionary." My hands trembled slightly as I accepted her business card. "We're honored you came to see the exhibition." "Actually," she lowered her voice, "I'm here to offer you a position. We're establishing a new department focusing on artistic preservation techniques. The salary is substantial, and you'd have complete creative control." My heart stopped. The National Museum of Natural History. It was every preservationist's dream. But it was in Washington, D.C., hours away from Richmond, hours away from Natasha. "Take some time to think about it," Dr. Matthews said, noting my hesitation. "We'd need you to start in 3 months." Across the room, Natasha was speaking with a representative from a prestigious publishing house. Her eyes met mine, and she beamed, unaware of the weight settling in my chest. The evening continued in a blur of congratulations and sales. Our exhibition was being hailed as groundbreaking, a perfect marriage of science and art. Critics praised the innovative presentation, the depth of detail, the emotional resonance. Later that night, as we were closing up, Natasha pulled me into a quiet corner. "The publisher wants to do a book," she said excitedly, "a full-color collection of our collaboration." I forced a smile, the job offer burning a hole in my pocket. "That's amazing, love." She caught my hesitation immediately. "What's wrong? Did something happen?" Before I could respond, the gallery owner called us over to meet another collector. The moment passed, but the question lingered between us. Back home, I watched Natasha remove her earrings, her movements graceful in the dim light of our bedroom. She was humming softly, still riding the high of our successful opening. "The National Museum offered me a position," I finally said. Her hands stilled. "In D.C.? Full creative control, my own department." The words felt like ashes in my mouth. She turned to face me, her gray eyes searching mine. "When would you start?" 3 months. I moved closer, needing to touch her. "But I won't take it. I can't leave you. Hazel." She caught my hands in hers. "This is your dream job." "You're my dream," I replied, pressing my forehead to hers. She kissed me then, soft and sweet, tasting of champagne and success. When she pulled back, her eyes were shining. "We'll figure it out." The next morning, surrounded by press reviews of our exhibition, we tried to discuss it rationally, but every scenario ended with miles between us. "I could commute," I suggested weakly. "In D.C. traffic?" Natasha shook her head. "You'd spend more time on the road than in the lab." We were interrupted by another call from the publisher. As Natasha discussed contract details, I slipped out to the balcony, watching Richmond wake up. The morning sun caught the dew on a spider's web, making it glitter like strands of fate. The exhibition continued to draw crowds, our names appearing in art magazines and scientific journals. But beneath the success, the clock was ticking. Dr. Matthews wanted an answer within the week. That evening, as we walked along the James River, Natasha stopped suddenly. "Kiss me," she said. I did, pouring all my confusion and love into the gesture. When we parted, she smiled sadly. "We can't let fear of separation stop us from growing." "I don't want to grow apart from you," I whispered. She touched my cheek gently. "Sometimes we have to trust that love is stronger than distance." The river flowed steadily beside us, constant despite its endless movement. Like the specimens I preserved, some things remained beautiful even when frozen in time. But others, like love, needed space to evolve. I had until Friday to decide. The weight of the choice pressed against my chest with each passing hour, even as our exhibition continued to garner praise and attention. Success had never felt so bittersweet. Thursday night found me in our home studio, surrounded by specimens and sketches, drafting my response to Dr. Matthews. Each version felt wrong, either too eager, making me seem callous about leaving Natasha, or too reluctant, potentially jeopardizing the opportunity. The cursor blinked mockingly on my laptop screen. Outside, Richmond's lights twinkled like captured fireflies. Natasha was at a late meeting with the publisher, and the apartment felt empty without her presence. I'd spent the week imagining life in D.C., the prestigious position, the resources, the recognition. But every daydream felt hollow without Natasha's laugh echoing through it, without her artistic perspective challenging and enriching my work. The sound of keys in the door startled me from my thoughts. Natasha burst in, her cheeks flushed with excitement, her gray eyes bright. "Don't send that email," she said, dropping her bag and rushing to my side. "Not yet." "What happened?" I stood, concerned by her intensity. "The publisher doesn't just want a book," she grabbed my hands. "They want a series, and they're offering me a position as their lead nature illustrator. Here in Richmond." My heart stuttered. "Here?" "They're expanding their scientific publishing division," she explained, words tumbling out. They want me to oversee all their nature-related projects. Full creative control. Better salary than I ever imagined. Natasha, that's incredible. I pulled her close, breathing in her familiar scent. Wait, there's more. She pulled back, her eyes dancing. They're partnering with several museums and research institutions, including the National Museum of Natural History, I finished, beginning to understand. She nodded eagerly. I told them about your offer. They want to collaborate on special projects. You could consult from Richmond, travel to DC when needed. You orchestrated all this? I asked, amazed. I just connected the dots. She touched my cheek. Like you taught me when studying specimen patterns. I kissed her then, overwhelmed by her brilliance, her determination, her love. She responded with equal fervor, backing me against my desk. Papers scattered, but neither of us cared. I can't let you sacrifice your dream for me, she whispered against my lips. You're not letting me sacrifice anything, I replied. You're helping me find a better dream. Later, tangled in our sheets, we planned our future. The publisher's offer would allow Natasha to work primarily from home, with occasional travel for special projects. My modified role with the National Museum would mean monthly trips to DC, but Richmond would remain our base. We could get a bigger place, Natasha mused, tracing patterns on my skin. Something with proper studio space for both of us. And better ventilation for the specimens, I added, making her laugh. The next morning, I drafted a new email to Dr. Matthews, proposing the alternative arrangement. Her response came quickly, enthusiasm about the potential collaboration, appreciation for the innovative approach. Natasha found me on our balcony, watching the sunrise paint Richmond's skyline. Having second thoughts? She asked softly. I pulled her into my arms. Only about why I ever thought I had to choose between my work and you. Because you're a perfectionist, she teased, kissing my neck. You think everything has to be preserved exactly as it is. Some things are better when they're allowed to evolve, I admitted. We spent that evening celebrating, first with dinner at our favorite restaurant by the river, then with a long walk through the city we'd both grown to love. The late spring air was heavy with possibility. Move in with me properly, I said suddenly, stopping under a streetlight. No more pretending we have separate spaces. Let's find our perfect place together. Her answer was a kiss that tasted of promise and forever, there under the Richmond stars. Around us, the city hummed with life, as vibrant and evolving as our love. Later, watching Natasha sleep, I realized that the most beautiful specimens aren't the ones perfectly preserved in time, but the ones that continue to grow while keeping their essential nature intact. Like us. The historic brick building in Richmond's art district caught our eye immediately. Built in the 1920s, it had served as everything from a tobacco warehouse to an artist's commune. Now it was being converted into live workspaces, and the top floor unit seemed designed for us. Look at these windows, Natasha breathed, running her hand along the massive industrial panes. The natural light is perfect for both drawing and specimen photography. The space was raw and open, with exposed brick walls and wooden beams. High ceilings could accommodate my preservation equipment, while the separate wings would give us both dedicated work areas. Best of all, it had a private rooftop terrace overlooking the James River. We signed the lease that day, both trembling with excitement as we wrote our names side by side on the document. This wasn't just an apartment, it was our first real home together. Moving in became an exercise in merging our lives completely. No more separate spaces, no more hiding. My specimen cases found homes alongside Natasha's easels. Her art supplies mingled with my preservation tools. Even our books intertwined on the built-in shelves, scientific journals nestled against art portfolios. The first night in our new home, we celebrated with takeout on the bare floor, surrounded by boxes and possibilities. Natasha had been sketching layout ideas all day, and her fingers were stained with charcoal. Come here, she said suddenly, pulling me to my feet. I want to christen every room properly. What followed was a night of passionate exploration, christening indeed every corner of our new space. We made love against the exposed brick walls, on the wooden floors that would soon hold our furniture, under the stars visible through our ceiling windows. The next morning, I woke to find Natasha already setting up her studio space. She'd arranged her easels to catch the morning light, creating a golden workspace that seemed to glow. This feels different, she said, not turning around. More permanent. I wrapped my arms around her from behind, breathing in her familiar scent mixed with fresh paint. It feels like home. We spent the next few weeks settling in, finding our rhythm in the new space. My preservation lab took shape in the East Wing, with proper ventilation and climate control. Natasha's studio occupied the West Wing, flooded with afternoon light perfect for painting. Our first minor disagreement came over decorating the main living space. I preferred clean, minimal lines that reminded me of museum displays. Natasha wanted more color, more life. It can't all look like a laboratory, she argued, holding up vibrant fabric samples. And it can't look like an artist's fever dream, I countered, eyeing the bold patterns warily. We found compromise in subtle touches, her colorful throw pillows softening my modern furniture, my carefully preserved butterfly specimens adding natural art to her painted walls. Like our work, our styles complemented rather than clashed. One evening, as we lounged on our new sofa, Natasha began sketching me. I watched her hands move across the paper, creating something beautiful from simple observation. "Remember our first night together?" she asked, not looking up from her drawing. "After the fire? How could I forget?" I shifted slightly, maintaining my pose. "You saved my specimens. And you saved my art." She set down her sketchbook, crawling over to join me. "Now look at us." The kiss started soft but quickly deepened, filled with memory and promise. We didn't make it to the bedroom, instead creating new memories right there in our living room. Later, wrapped in one of Natasha's colorful throws, we watched the city lights twinkle through our windows. The space around us was finally taking shape, not just as a home, but as a testament to our combined creativity. "I never thought I'd find this," Natasha murmured, tracing patterns on my skin. "Someone who understands both the art and the science of love." I pulled her closer, thinking about how far we'd come from that first meeting at the folk festival. Like the specimens I preserved and the subjects she drew, our love had undergone its own metamorphosis. The next morning, watching Natasha work in her sun-drenched studio, I realized that some things don't need to be preserved under glass. Some things stay beautiful simply because they're allowed to live and grow in the light. Our home became a reflection of that understanding. A space where art and science, preservation and evolution, structure and creativity could all coexist in perfect harmony, just like us. The idea came to me one morning as I watched Natasha sketch a rare morpho butterfly I'd preserved. She had a way of capturing not just its appearance, but its essence, the suggestion of movement in static wings, the hint of life in preserved beauty. "We should create something together," I said, moving behind her easel. "Not just side by side, but truly combined." Her gray eyes lit up with interest. "What are you thinking?" Over the next few weeks, we worked in secret, combining our talents in a way we never had before. I carefully preserved specimens in various stages of metamorphosis, while Natasha created illustrations that seemed to flow from and around them. The centerpiece would be a massive Luna moth installation. I preserved the specimen with its wings partially opened, suggesting flight. Natasha's illustrations surrounded it, showing its life cycle in ethereal detail, her artwork seeming to emerge from the actual specimen like a dream taking flight. We worked late into the nights, fueled by passion and possibility. Sometimes we'd catch each other staring, me mesmerized by the way her hands moved across paper, her captivated by my careful preservation process. "It's like watching a dance," she said one evening, observing my precise movements, "the way you honor their beauty." I smiled, thinking how she did the same thing with her art. We were both preservationists in our own way. I captured physical beauty, while she captured the essence of life itself. The private viewing gallery was set for a warm spring evening. We'd invited only a select few close friends, fellow artists, and trusted colleagues, but I had plans that went beyond showcasing our work. That morning I woke before dawn, slipping out of bed while Natasha slept. In my private workroom, I carefully retrieved a small box I'd hidden weeks ago. Inside was my most delicate preservation work yet, a tiny butterfly, its wings displaying an iridescent pattern that seemed to spell out "Marry me" when caught in the right light. It had taken months of careful preparation, combining techniques I developed specifically for this piece. The gallery looked magical as twilight approached. Our combined pieces told stories of transformation, of beauty preserved and reimagined. But the final display case remained covered. Natasha moved through the space, greeting guests and explaining our process. She was radiant in a dress that matched the blue of morpho wings, her blonde hair catching the carefully arranged lighting. As the evening reached its peak, I called for everyone's attention. Art and science are often seen as opposites, I began, my heart racing. But Natasha taught me there are really two ways of seeing the same truth. I led her to the covered display case. This final piece is about transformation, not just of insects but of love itself. When I removed the cover, Natasha gasped. The butterfly's wings caught the light perfectly, revealing my question in shimmering letters. Before she could speak, I dropped to one knee. You taught me that the most beautiful specimens aren't the ones we freeze in time, but the ones we allow to keep growing. My voice shook slightly. Will you grow with me forever? Tears sparkled in her gray eyes as she pulled me to my feet. Yes, she whispered against my lips. 1,000 times yes. The gallery erupted in applause, but we barely noticed. We were lost in our own moment of metamorphosis, transforming from partners to fiancés under the witness of preserved butterflies and painted wings. Later that night, back in our home studio, Natasha started a new sketch, us, surrounded by butterflies both preserved and illustrated, caught in an eternal dance of science and art, reality and imagination. You know, she said, adding detail to the drawing, some might say it's impossible to preserve a moment forever. I wrapped my arms around her, watching her work. I think we've proven that wrong. We just had to find the right combination of preservation and evolution. She turned in my embrace, her eyes full of love and promise. Like us. Outside our windows, Richmond glittered like scattered stars. While inside, our combined artwork told stories of transformation and permanence, of science and art, of two women who found a way to preserve love while letting it fly free. The butterfly that helped me propose now sits in a special case in our studio, a testament to the fact that sometimes the most beautiful specimens are the ones that help us transform into something even more magnificent, together.